Hiya.
How you doing?
I'm actually a bit knackered because you know what? The most frustrating thing in life is when you park your car and then you can't remember where you parked it.
and
Um,
and for listeners, Mim is quite a new car owner, like within the
yeah,
last year. So
yeah,
it's still a novelty, and there's obviously fewer occasions to use our cars at the moment
yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
I
So what
know.
was it like, kind of like street parking, and you just kind of had to park wherever you could,
You
and
know
then
when
you
you,
just didn't really know where
yeah,
you were?
you know when you're going somewhere and then there's not a lot of places to park. They're all like permit holder areas. So
Yeah.
you're then in these back streets, aren't you? You're
Mm.
looking for a spot, and then you're like, oh, thank God, like
Yeah.
found one, and you're just about like, let me just lock up this thing and like go to where I'm supposed to be. And I didn't really take much
Oh
consideration of where I'd left
no.
it. But what's annoying is like, there are breadcrumbs. Like you're like, okay, I know I passed this area. I recognize this building.
Mm.
I know I passed that. Like, and I know it's one of these roads, and you're just like circling back on yourself.
Oh
And then
man.
also, the more you walk around the streets, the more streets you recognize. So you're like, do I recognize this from
From my footfall or from my car fall?
yeah. So that has just left me emotionally, spiritually, physically
It was frustrating
damaged.
as well. Like, that's a frustrating situation for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what happened. But other than that, I'm in my Kim Jong-un twin set.
Oh.
No, I say that it's because it's literally this like knitted,
Totalitarian.
yeah, it's this knitted like cord that I bought, and I thought it was like banging on the website. I bought it a while ago, and then I wore it and I tried it on for the first time when it arrived and realized this is the exact suit that Kim Jong-un, North Korean dictator, wears. You can Google him, and it's
It's a look, it's a
it's
vibe.
a strong look, let's say. Yeah. What about you? How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay. What my latest venture this week? So I've finished my knitted jumper for myself. I've been
Oh yeah.
lacking something to do with my time that's not just on a screen. And so I made some scented candles this weekend.
Stop.
It was really easy.
Yeah,
And
you just melt it and pour it.
a few of the
still.
scents really aren't my cup of tea, but we'll give those out to other people. But yeah,
The jumper did look really good though. I feel like maybe you should post that image and you can maybe put like an emoji over your face or something. But
yeah, maybe I should, because you know what?
it's fashion, darling.
And full disclosure, like I actually I did. We had, well, when I say we did a knitwear module, it was terrible. We had to just knit squares of things for our knit module, but I actually chose to do a very large majority of my degree and actually did knitting internships and stuff like that, because a few people, I think, who don't know me that well, who follow me, were like, how the hell have you done this? I was just like, I actually studied this.
I'm actually
like,
a professional knitter.
I actually like created garments for people to wear on a runway. Like, it's not, I've not just whipped this out of my back pocket on like a Sunday afternoon.
Who would have thought someone would be like, I actually created runway pieces for my knitting students?
I mean, one of my like craziest things, it was actually crochet. I had to crochet these hot pants for a men's fashion show, and I remember being like,
I think I remember this.
This isn't my proudest achievement, to be honest. But yeah, if you didn't know, guys, you are listening to Style Over Substance with, of course, me, Scarlett,
and myself, Mim.
And we just want to say thanks, guys, for the support. We're still really enjoying hanging out with you guys and one another.
Yeah.
And we've got some fashion stories to share with you.
Yeah. We haven't had one for like 2 weeks or something.
I know. What's your fashion story, Mim?
Okay, so mine is Virgil Abloh is joining the Royal College of Arts as a visiting lecturer. And last summer, he actually presented a talk, an online discussion, and it was entitled A Lecture on Potential Solutions, Ideas on Race in Areas of Art, Design and Current Culture Based on Experiences. So I suppose they enjoyed that so much that he's come back again and really like to be joining the RCA family in maybe a fuller way, a fuller role, basically. Did you know this?
Imagine.
I
That's
know.
cool, man. And also, the Royal College of Arts, in my sort of journey of meeting people through fashion, tends to be where people go maybe for a master's rather than their like core fashion degree.
That's true.
But that's cool, man. That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I think I'm sure that fell with Black History Month.
Well, Black History Month in the States.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because this over here, it's I believe it is LGBTQIA month. I think.
I feel like it should be global, so we're all aligned. You know?
I know, like International Women's Day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's coming up actually the day before this goes out.
And
holler to our ladies.
Yeah. And you know what? That is like another fashion story, because you know how Net-a-Porter every year they do those limited edition t-shirts.
Oh, I love them. If they weren't so expensive, I would.
It's for charity.
No, but like they're also, it's like £100 for a t-shirt.
I know, but
which is actually cheap for Net-a-Porter.
But that's the thing, if you're going to fundraise and you know your crowd, you're not going to lowball it, are you? Because then it would be a bit like cheeky.
But it's more for me is like more of a regular, not a regular customer of Net-a-Porter, just more of a regular Joe.
Yeah. You want to buy into it.
I would love to buy into something like that, but I also kind of think at the end of the day, it's a slogan t-shirt. With a really important slogan, like don't get me wrong, don't you worry, I'm going to be filling the world with my thoughts on International Women's Day. You best believe it. But yeah, that's really cool. I think that's really important to talk about. So like the fact that fashion's really important is actually really important. It's one of the most lucrative industries for many countries. And it's important that we make sure that, you know, people are being respectful, whether it's ensuring that we aren't having slavery in Leicester, sorry boohoo.com, or if it's that, you know what, like respecting that not just white people make clothes, you know, like there's lots of things that can be done with the diversity in fashion. Yeah, and actually, like, I imagine that it's really exciting for him to kind of try and help path a way for emerging talent. Like, I think that, and also like, you know, his career has been one that like we all have seen just rise and rise and rise. But like, I'm sure there was a point where obviously he sat in a classroom. Yeah. And he wasn't who he is now, and trying to inspire young people to potentially be like him.
And we've spoken in the past about, you know, like the great designers of the past who came out of like big fashion eras or big fashion moments. Like we've said that we wanted to do an episode on Mugler because he's like a whole incredible talent. We've spoken about Karl Lagerfeld and how him and Yves Saint Laurent kind of rose and like developed careers at such a like pivotal moment in time in European fashion. And definitely. I don't know, it's I felt like when we were growing up, there weren't fashion designers except for like Alexander McQueen, who's like beloved. But other than that, there weren't fashion designers that them as a person and their career was like interesting or inspiring or like larger than life. Do you know what I mean? We had like the Victoria Beckhams and stuff,
didn't kind of have like, and this isn't to negate their creativity, but didn't have like money to fall back on. Like, I'm a huge fan of Mary Catron-So, who came like out of Central St. Martin's, but she's got a very, very wealthy family.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah. And like, you know, like you said, VB, she's a bloody Spice Girl, and David Beckham's like bailed out her company X amount of times. Stella McCartney's dad was a Beatle.
Yeah.
So like, it's actually really important to hear a story of someone who like his sheer talent and creativity like has risen him to like, and be really relevant with kids too. Like that's not an easy feat. That's really not an easy feat these days. Yeah,
definitely.
Awesome.
So what's your fashion story?
Wow, I guess ours are connected in a similar vein of fashion's so much more than clothes, you know. Like there's messages, there's importance behind it. And one of the big things I actually love for fashion is that it's a real cultivating space for new emerging talent in music. You know, like you don't have Kylie Minogue singing at a show. You often see young emerging talent. People want to be that person who's snapped up that like person who might just be about to launch. And funnily enough, someone I used to work with, her sister performed at the Valentino show in Milan.
Oh my God, her
Cosima.
And she did a cover of oh my gosh,
it's incredible. We'll post it on our Instagram and stuff. So
very dramatic.
She's got a really old soul voice. She's kind of got like a sort of Tracy Chapman-esque, like it's not like a conventional voice. And I've like seen her in one of like her first gigs. And like weirdly enough, when we were doing research once in Selfridges, her song came on and all of this stuff when I was there with her sister. But I just think, that's really cool. So she's trying to make it in the music industry and has been for a long time. And she's got some really incredible songs. But I just thought that that's an element of fashion that we've not really talked about before. But the music you pick for a show is so important. It's so important. Like the amount of times I've been sat in the office and you hear like them trying to decide music and like you hear it thumping out and like they're trying to figure it. And I just thought that's super cool because I know sort of like her through a person, but that it gives a real platform for music. And that music, like you said, it was very dramatic. So actually that could totally change the feel of the show. You guys will hear our next week's episode. We're talking about filmography and how that has an impact. But like there's so many things that actually are so important to fashion shows.
Yeah, I think you're right. We haven't really had a discussion about this, and I haven't given too much thought about the importance of music. I mean, of course, we watch shows, and when you watch them, sometimes you're like, this music is horrendous.
Oh, a lot of the time it's soundless, like just and
it's really boring. But then I just kind of learned to block that out. But when you get it right, it can be so right. And it's about not just putting on a cute show, but it's about, okay, you know how you might have a new outfit and you're crafting in your mind the time you're going to be like walking into a bar wearing this outfit or walking down the street. You're imagining scenarios in your head. Item or the person you're going to be in this item. And that's what a show is supposed to be about.
For sure.
And it's supposed to be like the soundtrack to your life almost. And you know how some really corny people like, the street is your runway. That's what the music in a show, in essence, is supposed to make you feel. It's like, you know, when you play music in your car or something, you can feel like you're driving a Ferrari when you've got some like
banger.
I know, some like 1 liter banger. And so you're right in that sense.
Yeah, and actually, like, so this song that I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite songs of all time. But there's a Burberry show that really sticks out to me. They always do live music at the old Burberry, we'll call it, shows. And they were live sessions, and so Yazoo, the song Only You, is one of my favorite songs of all time.
The guy who plays the piano.
I'm not sure. It's like do 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 do. Sorry, everyone. But basically, the lady is singing it live with an orchestra, and it's a totally different arrangement. And that's, you know, it's totally changing the song. Or like they have like the likes of like, I don't know, it was I can't think of anyone's names at the moment.
You are really struggling today.
I'm really struggling today. Who's the guy who sings My House in Budapest? George Ezra.
Oh,
so
okay.
like, you know, like before his like album launches, like that'd be the kind of thing where Burberry be like, we'll have him perform live, his album's about to launch, and we look like we were there on that cusp. And that's how important these like
we're
music
like
choices
the tastemakers almost.
For sure. And I'm pretty sure, so Cosima has performed at loads of these sort of after parties and different things in the fashion scene, and her career has very much been linked with fashion, maybe from her sister's connection, who knows. But yeah, I think, I don't know if it's something we can even talk about deeper, but music and fashion. And even like, so when you were talking about how we are picturing that fashion moment, all I can think of is Made in Manhattan. I'm you will have seen this film, Miranda. Jay.
I've seen Made in Manhattan lots.
Yeah. You will have seen this film for sure.
I've seen it lots of times, of course.
But you know, she gets like dressed up for that ball, and they're all like dancing to I'm Coming Out, and it's just that moment. And that's what I thought of when you think like we have these moments where like, this is it, and you get that like soundtrack in your head. Love Made in Manhattan.
I know, that was J-Lo's golden film era.
Because
she had a lot of good films. Anyway,
love J-Lo. We interrupt this broadcast to remind you, go follow us on Instagram, Style Over Substance Pod. Shoot us an email, styleoversubstancepete@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, find us on Twitter. We've got all the links on our Instagram. You know what to do.
So
we move on.
Our topic for this week, do you want to introduce it?
Sure. So we've talked a lot about luxury brands we know and love, and don't you fear, we will be discussing some more brands in depth coming up soon. But one thing that we actually think is really important to talk about these luxury brands is ownership. Who owns a brand? If a brand stands independent, like self-sufficient essentially, and basically what that entails for brands and the fashion industry in general, I guess. Yeah, there's so many brands that we all know and love, you know, especially if you're a luxury fashion head, let's say. But I think that it's just interesting to know kind of what group they're part of, if any, the history of these companies. And there are some brands also that are still owned by the family, like 100 years later, pretty much.
but I think it's also interesting to like, we'll kind of get more into it, but the idea of, can you be a luxury fashion brand and survive by yourself? Is it possible in 2021 or in the past however odd years? And spoiler alert, it's really difficult.
Keep tuning in to
yeah. Listen for more. But yeah, it's a really interesting discussion that we hear the likes of the LVMHs, the Kerings of the world, and we don't necessarily understand how influential they are in luxury fashion or in fashion in general. And we don't really, I don't know, for me, who like reads about this stuff, and you who like, obviously we both worked in this sort of thing, there are a lot of people who buy into luxury fashion who maybe just would like some more, just more information on this sort of thing. So yeah, ownership is this week's topic.
Yeah, and so I don't know if it's too soon to go into a headline that came up for me when I was researching this, but for context, there are 6 companies. So like we're talking your LVMHs, your Kering,
like conglomerates, basically.
And 6 companies own over 40 fashion brands. So I'm going to give you a rundown of the names of these companies because I actually haven't heard of some of them.
Okay.
But we have your LVMH. And so under this ownership, it's of course Louis V, Celine, Loewe, Dior, Berluti, Kenzo, Givenchy, Marc Jacobs, Fendi, Emilio Pucci, Pink, DKNY.
I didn't know that one.
And then I can't even read what that is. It's not a good enough brand to mention. But like, those are some top dogs.
Big players. And LVMH, it's like Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy.
Yeah.
So they're all about like the whole luxury ecosystem in a sense. Like it's not just fashion for them. It's like, if you're going to the south of France, what you drinking? Like Veuve Clicquot?
Yeah.
Moet Hennessy, like that's it. You're sorted for like, you know, this is like a company that really targets the rich lifestyle.
Like it's outrageous. Then of course we've got our Kering group. So that's Gucci, Bottega Veneta, Saint Laurent, Alexander McQueen, Balenciaga, Christopher Kane, Stella McCartney, Sergio Rossi. So that's Kering. Then we move on to, I think it's maybe called Richemont.
No, it's Richemont.
Like Richemont.
Yeah. Richemont.
That's Chloe, Alaya, Dunhill, Net-a-Porter. Then we have one called Puig, Puig.
They do. I think they're Spanish, and I think they do perfumes.
Yeah, I'm guessing they're Spanish because they've got Nina Ricci, Paco Rabanne, Carolina Herrera.
Yep.
And Jean Paul Gaultier. And then we've got Label Luxe, which is Bally, Belstaff, Jimmy Choo.
Ooh.
And then we have one called OTB, and that is the Maison Martin Margiela, Marni, Victor and Rolf, Diesel. So that's like crazy. Like, so to begin with, maybe it's best to like take a step back and say it doesn't necessarily mean that like there's one person designing everything for all of these. Essentially, these are guys in suits, and they are basically stakeholders. I mean, they're not, but they basically own the cash. So LVMH has got all the names we listed, and they might go, we'll invest this much in Louis Vuitton this year. And that's kind of the importance they have. And I'm sure there's hiring and firing elements and stuff like that. But the creative CEO and all of the jobs within that is still in the company of a Louis Vuitton or a Celine.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you take an LVMH, the CEO of the group can decide who the creative director is of any brand, and you know they will choose who's heading up the business from like a creative perspective, a merchandising perspective, and all of that. They will decide which brand gets the most attention financially, creatively, whatever. And I mean, we can go into one of like the benefits of a group, to be honest, because it kind of leads on. But very often in these cases, the reason why you see big groups of fashion brands is because if 1 year, or for, let's take Gucci, the past, 10 years, Gucci's like been killing it, let's say 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And they were like the cash cow of Kering. They were, and now everyone's kind of got a bit of fatigue for Gucci.
Yeah.
And we're moving on to Bottega Veneta.
Yeah.
And they are like, Bottega Veneta, who was always making money, is now become like front and center.
Yeah.
And, like new creative
almost
direction.
On a par. Like, I mean, I don't know their financial figures, but I can't imagine they'd be too far off a Gucci from where they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know either, but definitely in popularity, it's like Bottega Veneta is like the it girl now.
Yeah,
of Kering. Balenciaga before that, in the Gucci Balenciaga era, when Balenciaga was just coming out with all crazy shit.
Yeah,
that's it. Kind of like whatever brand is making the most money, let's say, they're able to spread around that cash to the other
can kind
brand.
of carry their team.
Exactly.
For sure. And actually, an analogy that I have, and it's probably not the best for the listeners, but I actually think this is probably quite universal, that we see it all the time, whether you follow football or not. If a team's not doing well, their manager gets dropped,
Yeah.
And so these are companies that basically can oversee, hey, you know what? Gucci's been on this upward path, and all of a sudden, like, we've changed creative directors and it has gone down and it's not doing well enough, and we're paying this person a lot of money, and they can be that overarching person to basically ensure that the finances are in place.
Yeah.
And they can make that tough call of, you're out of here actually, because we hoped that you would actually add to our revenue and you haven't. And so like, they can be the overarching, we haven't won enough football games, toodles. But like you said, it's a spread performance, which is really beneficial.
Yeah.
For slightly smaller groups, like we were mentioning, Gucci was the king, and of course will probably always be, of the Kering group. And you've got the likes of Bottega. I think did it have Stella as well? Like, like a good performing brand, consistent, I'm sure, along the people who love that brand, and will have its ebbs and flows. But when you've got a steady like Gucci just like raking it in, it kind of doesn't matter if it's a bad year for Stella or Bottega and all of that stuff, which is really important, because the nature of fashion, like, actually the term fashion is like what's in,
exactly.
So, like, you can't always be in fashion.
And so following on from that, it's like they are always going to have like value. They're always going to have a brand that's in, hopefully, if you own enough brands, hopefully you can always have one that's raking it in. So, for example, although like Alexander McQueen has diehard fans, how many people are like, oh, I can't wait to get the next Alexander McQueen bag? No one. I mean, lots of people have the trainers. Remember that, when they had those thick trainers. But it doesn't matter, because people are still buying into Alexander McQueen, and they can like keep it going.
Quintessential British fashion designer, like, whether you've got an obsession with the UK or you're based in the UK and like that's it for you.
Yeah.
Or you're still inspired by Lady Gaga's love of Alexander McQueen from the 2000s. You know,
yeah.
but
the armadillo shoes.
Oh yeah. And
Come on,
all
they
like
were
you know,
great.
the V&A had a gorgeous exhibition of Alexander McQueen and all of this stuff, and of course they have slightly more mainstream pieces, but they're a brand that actually prides itself on not being too like regular. The trainers is probably the first thing we've seen from them.
Yeah.
That is an average thing. So you're right in saying that like it supports, it boosts these brands.
Then you have the idea of like they as a group can like pump money into things like their online strategy and their promotions and advertising and things like that. And what they'll also do is recently I think Kering has invested like 15 million euros into Vestiaire Collective only this week.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I saw that.
That's such a big like, okay, it's Vestiaire Collective is not a brand, it's a resale platform. But if they feel like this is where fashion is heading,
one of the groups also owns Net-a-Porter like that.
Yeah, Richemont.
You know, yeah, like
so they can like make money off fashion and support their brands. It's not about fashion, is not just about like who's making the hottest designs, because everyone wants to buy it and that alone we can survive off it. It's like, what's the next thing? Is it tech in fashion? Is it marketplace? Is it pre-loved market? Is it online Net-a-Porter type websites? And they can just like put their money in all these different pies and make money however and just keep everything afloat. Does that make sense? It's not just about the brands.
And actually, so if I don't know if it's taking a step back or a step forward, so I think we've mentioned it before, but for the purpose of repeating for the benefit of the situation, with the fact that brands do have times where they're in the spotlight and they're not, it is so hard to scale up in any business. You know, like say my brand or my candle business takes off. Like if tomorrow I haven't got a candle business, but this is a fun example, you know.
Yeah.
I'm making little candles in my house because I like burning candles. Say a listener tomorrow asks for 10,000 candles.
Yeah. You can't make that.
I can't make that.
You can't afford the materials.
I wouldn't be up front. They're not going to pay me or like anything like that. So like I can't cater for that. And that is genuinely what can happen with some of these brands that you don't even know. Of course, we all want to design the next it thing. Of course we do. But we actually don't know what that's going to be. You can try and you can try to think what it is. But all of a sudden something can, you know what, be in Grazia, Vogue, all magazines and take off. I guess now it would be an influencer randomly buying something from you and it being a hit.
Yeah. And you can't support those sales.
And you can't support that. And you obviously want to run with it because, of course, if I got an order for 10,000 candles, what a great money I would make. So, of course, you want to try and make that happen. So then maybe I hire someone to help make me candles. And actually, the next order is for 2. And I haven't got a job for this person who I've just hired. And that is like a very simplistic version of how it works in fashion, of like scaling up, of like, oh, like I need more people to check production, or our factory needs to be bigger, or all of these things. And it's such a hard thing to manage, the desire. And that's where these groups can come in and really help manage that, because it's really hard to scale up companies. Without the funds, like we said, I don't have the money to buy the supplies for 10,000 candles. But if I had a backer who knows, well, she's got that order, so we know the money's going to come in as soon as the order's fulfilled, nothing's lost there. But for me to take out a loan or something to get there, it feels a lot riskier, and it's just a support system for companies as well, where clearly these people have done their research that there's enough scope. It very rarely tends to be brands that you're surprised that they've been added to these groups, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that in the case of Tapestry, that many people might not even know what Tapestry is, but it is a group. It's an American group, and they are trying to position themselves as like the American equivalent of a Kering, of an LVMH, like a Richemont, because all of the three that I've just said, they're European, and like Prada Group, obviously Italian. But Tapestry is New York based, and they own Coach, Stuart Weitzman, and Kate Spade. And it's about like economies of scale. Like they're all doing similar things, leather bags and leather shoes. And so like the economies of scale, like, okay, we already have suppliers. We can now buy our leather from one supplier, but put in a bigger order. So we get it for cheaper, and we have like a better working relationship with the suppliers to cater to all our brands. Do you know what I mean? Or to
For sure.
Or a specific department across all our brands, let's say. So I know like Tapestry is a newly kind of a new group, and the Michael Kors one, remember we spoke about it, I think in the summer, is called like Capri Holdings, and they acquired Versace. And you might think Versace,
what's Michael Kors doing owning Versace?
I know, iconic Versace.
But you know what?
My gosh,
it's because there's too many women walking around with
a
one
Saffiano
of those plastic handbags. I can't. Is it Saffiano leather?
The Saffiano leather totes.
Oh,
and they were making him a killing. Enough for him to buy Versace, okay?
The one thing COVID's done, I just see one of those handbags.
I know. I have a Michael Kors. I have 2 Michael Kors bags, and I'm not going to hate on Michael Kors because
I love Michael Kors. I'm not, and also like Saffiano's got a time and a place, you know. But it's more that like it just took over the world, and people thought that meant it's the fact that people thought that meant luxury because it couldn't scuff. But
it remember it was the same time where Prada was doing the Saffiano. Anyway, we digress. So my point is that, as you mentioned, there are brands out there you're like, oh, I would have never thought they needed the money to scale up, but Versace did. If you think about it, and we've said this so many times, ready-to-wear is not the category that makes groups or brands the most amount of money. It is the makeup and the beauty stuff, and it's the bags and the shoes. And if you think of Versace and you thought about buying something from Versace, what are you thinking about buying, Scarlett? If you were going to buy anything from Versace, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
I wouldn't buy a robe. But that's what a lot of people would buy.
You would think of a robe. Versace
maybe
is
towels. Maybe towels. I don't know if they sell towels, but
because Versace
it for sure wouldn't be some clothing. I'll tell you that.
It's one of those brands that is like so well known. People tend to love Versace. I really like Versace as like a brand. But it's not for their shoes or their bags. It's for their silk shirts, you know.
And you know what? It's also like for the Versace house that you know we like all of that stuff. Like I'd probably get some plates, you know.
Yeah, I would. It's a bit of a unicorn in that sense that it's like known for those departments which don't necessarily are the typical departments that make a lot of. That make the brand, you know, make a lot of money for companies like this. And I think them being acquired by something as commercial as Michael Kors was to give them a boost, like commercially, like money wise. And like, we know what sells. This is what you need to focus on. And like, give them that like boost to become like a proper household name, like Gucci is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have those like centralized operations when you fall into a group, but also one thing that goes hand in hand with like economies of scale and like that in-house knowledge. I don't know if we talked about this a few months ago, but in cases like I think Hermes and with Chanel,
Mm-hmm.
these brands will buy up suppliers and craftsmanship warehouses or work, like workhouses and other smaller companies that have like really specialized skill. They'll buy them up so that they can always ensure they have a supply of that leather, a supply of that craftsmanship.
For instance, with Chanel, I think it's something like the binding that would be on their tweed boucle, like their manufacturer. Like I'm sure they will have bought that. Like I'm sure of it.
Well, I know that their Métier d'Art show that they put out every year, which is like their like couture show basically.
Yeah,
that is a chance for them to display like a number of like artisan workshops that they own, that they've like slowly kind of
like
bought
so like
into.
like the places where they're using looms to make the tweeds and stuff like that. It's almost like an exhibition of, we own this creativity. Like
this is the best that we can do because we. Oh my god! I was gonna make a RuPaul Drag Race reference.
Do it. But yeah, it's a very different ownership to the LVMHs and stuff like that. That it's they've almost reinvested back into themselves. These sort of companies.
And that's not something you can do if you're just an independent, like one brand standing by itself. No. I mean, unless you have like a lot of money.
Like Hermes own a crocodile farm.
Do they?
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense.
So at one point I was working with Croc Skin, and I'm pretty sure it was faux, because Croc Skin makes a bag very expensive. It's a really exotic skin.
It was probably like embossed leather with the
but there was
pattern.
I think it was, we definitely used python and lizard, and we were delving whether or not we should have these, like, because the Middle East was still quite a big market, and we weren't sure just to make these really elite bags. And we had a store at the time, and people would walk in and want to see exotic.
Oh, okay.
And it was like, do we need to create 1 or 2 or 3 pieces that are like these pièce de resistance bags? And we would talk about, we need to think about the conditions for all of this stuff. And I was like, I'm not being funny. We can't exactly own a crocodile farm. And also, just because there's an Hermes logo on a crocodile farm doesn't necessarily mean like the crocodiles that like are farmed any better. And I don't know the conditions, let's be honest, if it's an animal being put on a bag, it's like, it is what it is. But Hermes owning a crocodile farm shows you that, like, that's them investing in the fact that crocodile, the Birkin is what the world's most expensive bag.
Yeah.
And they throw crocodile skin on that. And then that makes it like a 50 grand bag.
Yeah.
So they're investing in the fact that they know that people are going to do that, which is wild.
Yeah. But it makes sense.
But yeah, of course, like financially, actually, when you think about it, and actually, like, that's what lots of people want them for. Like that's what the Birkin is for. It's elite, it's limited edition. You're using one of the most expensive materials in the world. What then normally comes with something as exotic as crocodile is that your gold hardware is plated to a higher spec. So you're getting as luxe a product as you can get. So why wouldn't you invest in that? Why wouldn't you like have that as part of, like, and that probably is justifying the cost somewhat. They're like, hey, we owned the crocodile.
Yeah, I mean with that it means that because they own these factories or suppliers or whatever in-house, it's cheaper to acquire the product, so their profit margin just gets bigger in essence.
Greedier,
yeah. Yeah, it's business, baby. But yeah, that's just part of the benefits of a brand being part of, like a Richemont, a Kering, an LVMH, an OTB, whatever. But I think we should discuss maybe some big names that either own their group or are still quite independent.
For sure. So there aren't many people who are independent per se, but because they've maybe had an investor, they're, like you mentioned before, Mim, their family name and their family is still at the forefront of the group. And you know what, if I had a brand, that probably would be quite an important thing to me.
Yeah,
especially like a heritage brand, like a Prada or anything like that, is that your family is actually still at the core of making the important decisions.
Definitely. It's difficult, but like, for example, Prada Group, they of course own Prada and Miu Miu, and then they've bought Church's shoes, which are like, you know, world renowned like shoes. And then they also own another brand called Car Shoe. I don't know if you know that.
What? That probably got thrown in with Church. But correct me if I'm wrong, they're still the decision makers.
Yeah. So Miuccia Prada, she runs and owns the group with her husband. She's, as we know, still the creative director of Prada and Miu Miu. And
jointly shared for
co-creative director of Prada alongside Raf. But this Prada has been in her family for generations. I think 2 or 3 generations, and she has been the one to bring an important brand. You know, they were always luxury, but to make it even more mainstream.
Yes, so that was really the birth of Miu Miu, really. So obviously it was named after her, Miuccia Prada, Miu Miu, and was meant to be a bit more approachable. It was meant to be a bit
more her. I think it was supposed to be a bit more of like what she would want to wear. And like her just having like total free reign of like the designs in her.
And like me personally, I mean, Prada's incredible, but I remember being younger and Miu Miu's a bit more playful on different generations of fashion. It's always playing off of like 60s, 70s. Like it's always sort of looking backwards, but also putting a modern twist on things. And I'm sure it's based around her style and the era she grew up with and all of that stuff. And just trying to be a little bit different to Prada. But you can kind of somewhat tell they're connected. And I always loved Miu Miu. Like sort of just loved the brand. Like at one point their bags, you know, that those like ruched black bags were like everywhere. They were huge.
I always wanted one.
Almost like I really wanted one, and actually I would still love like a vintage one of those. I think they're really timeless. I think Faith's mum had one.
I think I have a dupe. It's a different brand. I mean, it's a different brand, but it's like ruched leather. And I think it's dupe.
But like those bags were absolutely everywhere. And this was also around the time where a lot of bag copies were happening. And that's a huge thing for a likes of a Prada group, that like maybe to begin with, Miu Miu was like a passion project they let their daughter have. You know what I mean? And it's actually taken and elevated this group and probably allowed them to have that control. The fact that they have 2 probably fairly equally successful brands, like Miu Miu and Prada are huge. They're huge. And the fact that they still have like the ultimate say so on what goes on, and hey, like that doesn't mean that they own 100% of their brand. But they are a majority stakeholder, or whatever their agreement is, has allowed them to remain in control.
And the same could be said for Fendi. I mean, Fendi as a brand is owned by Kering, I think, as you said. But Silvia Venturini Fendi is still the creative director. And she is the third generation of women in her family.
Jeez.
I think Eduardo and Adele Fendi, who her grandparents, they were the founders of
Incredible.
what was a leather and fur brand company manufacturer. And yeah, there's like a whole, if you Google the Fendi family, there's a whole bunch of women. It's true. And yeah, she's still designing. And it's really interesting because this year was the first couture show for Fendi. And it's like at a time when we could argue couture is
redundant.
It's redundant. Yeah, you're right. It's redundant.
I mean, it's for sure not. Like, for those don't panic, like, it has its place, but like in a year where we're all sat at home and award shows aren't even happening.
But like, even before that, like, it's incredibly expensive clothes that very few people
it's so indulgent.
Yeah, exactly. For the group to think, yeah, we can throw a shit ton of money at what is just a vanity project.
Yes.
Really says something about, you know, like how a group can invest in you financially and how that can like push you on to the next level if they want to, you know. I thought it was really interesting that is what.
And I also think it shouts for the stability of Fendi and how they found themselves in that group. But also importantly, they have got the sort of final say so. And so we've obviously talked a lot about ownership. And to be honest, from the list of what we've read off, they're all kind of the top brands, you know. They all tend to be owned by people, and that's not to say you can't do it. But what, like, the way I would try and explain it is, you can maybe have a fashion label and be independently owned, but if you want a brand, if you want the lifestyle, like a fashion brand, like, and to be on a level playing field with the likes of Fendi, Prada, Stella, like Bottega, like all of these people, even like Stuart Weitzman, like if you've got that backing, you are able to achieve so much more. And that doesn't make a fair playing field for someone who's self-funded. And I actually worked at a company during a time of them staying a majority stakeholder, but I'm telling you, it was probably 51-49. And
no shame in that. There's no shame in that.
No, not at all. And actually, for a while, they'd pride themselves on being independently owned, but it gets to a point where you want to scale up and you want to level up, and you just need that money. And I think you need that independent set of business eyes, because I think fashion is a very all-consuming industry, and I think you sometimes need someone to go, that didn't work, we're not doing that again, or like, yeah, I'm happy to take a risk on that, but like if it doesn't pay off, like I'm giving it 2 years for it to take off. And like I think you sometimes need those boundaries, because
you need that like business acumen
for
to like curb the creativity when it's needed to.
And actually, I was thinking this when we were chatting last week, that to be a creative director or like whatever the CEO, whatever the title is of the person who oversees it all, you are creating the vision for your collection. You are helping sign off marketing and merchandising strategies. You are potentially helping to decide what factories are being used, what materials are being used. how the vision of the show is going to be portrayed, how you want it filmed, what music you want, that you're doing so much. And there's also the business side that you've also got to make sure numbers are working. And hey, we've been told that actually kitten heels are a thing and we need to design them, but your creative brain is like, no. There's so much that plays in that. And I think that actually it's so important to have someone just come in and be like, this is it. Like, how can you not be so blinded by what you're doing when you're owning all of those decisions in the brand? I think actually ownership and someone helping you is really important.
So I get your point. It's about if you are independent, not only are you creative, but the financials are on your back as well. It has to be financially successful. And that's a lot of stress to have on one person. And when you are bought out or you become part of a group, you don't have to be responsible for the successes and failures of everything. So you can kind of take a step back and be only in the financials or only in the creative or in a bit of everything. But you don't I can imagine it doesn't keep you up at night as much because, it's not all your responsibility pretty much. But it's such a tough industry to be in. And I think it's really interesting that being part of a group really shapes whether you can be a success or not. I mean, we've talked about this a lot, that when we see new dual bags coming out, it's not necessarily because the design is fantastic and it's like, oh my gosh, never seen this before. Or even we take Balenciaga, who likes to take the piss, and he's like the biggest troll of the fashion industry because they will sell you a hoodie for £1,000 and there is nothing else on it but a DHL logo. And it's because they're able to throw money, guerrilla marketing at something and make it a success because everyone is wearing it, everyone's been gifted it, so it's gonna be a success. Pretty much, so these groups dictate how fashion trends go, in essence.
That's really important.
Who's reading Vogue? Everyone's just seeing this guerrilla marketing on social media. But then so you mentioned your point that it really adds to the success of a brand. But I think it's also important to remember that the biggest names that we know out there have been going for the longest. They have such longevity. And you see that just because you're part of a group doesn't mean everything is going to go well for you. Recently, Rihanna's brand, Fenty, I was going to say Fendi, Fenty, LVMH have decided to pull away from it and stop production of that ready-to-wear label because Rihanna's really popular. She comes with this massive following who will literally buy her bathwater, but Fenty as a brand was just too expensive for her demographic. And I mean, let's face it, people will spend hundreds on a piece of clothing from a brand like Balenciaga because it has been going for about 100 years. But people are not about to those real luxury heads who really buy luxury firsthand. They're not going to probably drop that amount of money on Fenty collections every season. So I think just because you're part of a group does not mean you're going to be this massive success. And I think that the heritage of your brand is so important as well.
For sure. And I think what you touched on of failures, you feel them if you're independently owned. You almost can't fail. And of course we all fail. Really good podcast. It's called How to Fail. That's actually important. You learn from those mistakes and actually a group absorbs that. But in the case of something like a Fenty, if lots of things are still like every collection there's a bit too much of like a down, you also have to be held accountable to that. And to be honest, if that was like owned by Rihanna or whatever, it probably wouldn't have even lasted that long, you know. And like you said, heritage is really important, and unfortunately there's no quick fix for that. But it's, you know what, it's like a lot of things. It's consistency. It is, you know, that's like, you got to play the long game in a lot of situations. You're not going to get 10,000 followers on Instagram overnight. It's a long game of consistently posting what you want to post and whatever it is. And it's the same with these brands. You've got to turn out collections, and like fashion heads will buy into new collections, but like you said, maybe it's not an every season they come back for you, but in time that can happen. And I think organic growth is actually the most important thing for like newer companies who one day might hope to be owned. And hey, like Tiffany has just been bought by LVMH, of course, really controversially. It's like what was set to be the most expensive like ownership deal, and then I think it got bumped down. I don't know if that is the case anymore, and of course there was a bit of legal drama. But there's also maybe something to be said of, is that like a negative that Tiffany can't be owned by itself? Are they unable? You know, like Tiffany's huge. Like how many girls want a Tiffany engagement ring because it's what we're told from films, and I don't even know what. It's probably the first jewelry company girls know about. So is that kind of crazy in some aspect that can't be self-sufficient? Maybe it's a strategic thing that they want to be owned, which will allow them to have an empire. Who knows? So like it's not a fell swoop of success or rags to riches, or that you have to have it, but I think it definitely helps. What do you think on like, is it a positive, or actually is it like accepting defeat that we can't do this alone? I'm sure that's the case for some people. What's sort of your general outlook on ownership and all of that?
My general view is that it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a business decision. I think it says a lot about what it takes to survive in fashion if you want to be a serious brand that survives generations, and it's cutthroat, and you have to have so much money behind you constantly,
and so much going for you, so much like fortune. There's lots of people who have very successful small independent labels. They make a lot of good money and they're able to like be millionaires, or, you know, live an amazing life out of what they've built. And that is commendable. But we're talking about like the internationally known brands that people covet, as you say. If you want to be one of those, it's, as you mentioned, you have to be in it for the long haul. And I mean, there's not many companies that can outpace an LVMH. They are like their CEO is like the second richest man in Europe. That says something, you know. And I also wonder at how, I think this could actually be a topic on its own of like, I'm sure that LVMH almost have a team to watch emerging talent.
Oh, definitely.
And obviously they could make and break someone's, not break, but they could make someone's career if you take the right steps. And I think there could be something really important, and I'm sure that happens. And like, look on the list, I'm sure they own more brands, and we haven't said their names because they're not globally known. But yeah, like the investment's a game, essentially, from what I understand. If you've got money, you spend it, you make more, you look for something else. And also, I guess there's a real sense of accomplishment of helping somebody get there, get to the leagues. but yeah, I it's part of me feels kind of sad that like a lot of the names we've discussed today, other than like an Alexander McQueen, who that fashion labels happened in our lifetime, like essentially, like we're not that old, but like, you know, he wasn't that old when he died. Like it was established whilst we were on this planet. Same with Stella. It's like it can be done. And Alexander McQueen got backing, but he didn't have money. Like he didn't come from money, and so it can happen. And like this isn't, I would hate for this to be a discouraging thing, but ultimately, like you really got to be special. Like these brands have been going for so long. Like we said, like Bottega's been going. We obviously did a brand episode on. They've been going for so long, and like as far as I'm concerned, this is like their time to shine. Like they haven't had many moments like the moment they've recently just had.
Yeah.
And they could have probably given up or whatever and just not accepted their consistent fan base. But yeah, I think ownership is for sure, I think the only way that brands in the future in fashion will exist.
Like owned by a bigger group being
to be honest, we haven't even touched on like High Street and Arcadia Group and all of that stuff, and obviously famously recently gone under, and now owned by ASOS, who probably is now a group that we're not even aware of.
ASOS and Boohoo, isn't it? Didn't they split up?
And then of course Zara owns multiple shops, Nike owns different shoe things, like the High Street, it happens there too. It's just like, I mean, I'm sure it happens in other industries too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's
So what is the what's your week's question for this episode?
Oh, I don't know. Part of me wonders, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I put you on the spot there, didn't I?
part of me is like, is it kind of like you couldn't make it on your own? Is that the perception?
So like
what as an outside sort of view, could Tiffany not make it on their own, or is this a strategic business move? But I feel like that's quite intense.
Yeah. Maybe like is there a company you'd like to see given the opportunity for like to join a group? Oh, that's a good one.
Is it? I'm trying to think of someone
like a Amina Muaddi, like an Attico.
I mean, I had so much love. They're sort of not as where they were. I was a big fan of Peter Pilotto. Like their prints, I loved them. They were rising around a similar time as Mary Catranceau, because Prince and all of that stuff was incredible. And I think Prince is a very clever thing to be good at. But like, had they had that opportunity, would they still sort of be up there? But yeah, I think it'd be cool if there's almost like scholarships or stuff like that. I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe what brand would people want to like almost ensure their legacy continues?
That's a cool one. Yeah, that's a great question. So
let us know, guys.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Have you got anything else you want to add this week?
No, but like businessmen own the world, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, what's new?
Yeah, men in suits.
And on that upbeat ending,
don't worry, International Women's Day is coming. Our time is coming.
Our one day of the year.
Oh, don't. I hate when people ask when International Men's Day is.
Oh, yeah. Well,
nearly every day from this episode. Oh, cool.
Anyway, thanks guys for listening again to this episode. Follow us on Instagram, because there we're going to be putting up pictures and different bits and bobs that correlate to this episode. And again, we'll be posting our weekly question, so leave us a comment on what your views are for the idea of groups, conglomerates, ownership and all that in luxury fashion.
We'd really like to hear from you.
And we'll see you